What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Alan of the Almighty Primordial. It is so great to have you here. Thanks for being here today.
All right. How are you doing? Okay.
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. This is my birthday interview. I turned 30 today, and technically Primordial is 30 as well, so it's great to celebrate my 30th birthday with you guys.
Yeah, well, I think we're even a little bit older. I think that we started the band in August 1991.
Oh, okay. So, all right, fair enough. But I think like the first time like we heard like the demo, I think like the Dark Romanticism demo was in 93. So like technically the world hearing about Primordial is 30 years, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. But this new album, How It Ends, is absolutely kick ass. And the first thing I was curious about was, is this technically a continuation of Exile Amongst the Ruins? Or being that you put out the Camelot Sessions EP a little while ago, this is more or less a continuation of that, more so than the Exile Amongst the Ruins album?
Not really. Not really a continuation. I mean, it's been 5 years since Exile Amongst the Ruins, and we lost 2.5 years of that too. That kind of stuff. So we agreed as a band to not do anything in this time period. We weren't going to trade files or do all that kind of stuff. So we just waited, put the band on the shelf. And then last September, we thought, all right, let's light a fire under all of this and let's get moving. And everything that you hear is basically being written between last September, October, and like following March. So it was a kind of like, we moved through it very quickly once we got moving, once we got going, and once the wheels started to turn and stuff. So it's not really a continuation of anything. I think it's in anything. Exile is more of a record. Exile is more a record that's a bit more maybe like Journey's End or something. It's a bit darker. This one is much more aggressive, much more angry, much more epic metal. It's a bit harder. It's got a sort of defiant and fuck you-ness to some of it. It's sort of outlaw, resistance, rebel, whatever you want to say like that. That's the tone is generally a lot more defiant. We'll explore that, but yeah, that's kind of the main the feeling.
Was there sort of like a vision behind it? Because you basically described the album how I described it, as it does have like a real epic sort of feel to it. I feel like The Ruins was like very like, and I mean it as a compliment, it was very like, built up, and like there was like an introduction, a climax. This is kind of like going all into it with tracks like We Shall Not Serve, or Nothing New Under the Sun, or something like that, or All Against Us. So was this like a vision that you went into the making of this album with, or did it just kind of turn out that way?
We don't really have any particular plan. We're not a band that plan and plot out stuff much. With the songwriting starts, it begins to take on this feel somewhere about 50, 60, 70%, like, oh, this sounds like a song now. And we maybe take this bit here, of a change in the key here, and slowly but surely it comes to formation. But this kind of intensive working period means you kind of trust in your instinct quite substantially once you move into the studio and you allow some room for you to improvise in that setting. And also it sort of captures, I think heavy metal should capture that very sort of primal atavistic sense sometimes, that internal instinctual sound. So it's done analog, it's done much live as we can, no tempo maps, no file trading, no auto-tune, no nothing. It's like somebody recording an album in 1991. That's how we try and do as much as possible like that. Everybody works fucking hard, and you live with the flaws, and that's what gives it character. And I think we realized when we were in the studio that this is going to be a bit more of a angry, defiant record, and that's good. Feels like to me, if I can say so, that the sort of metal scene needs maybe something like this, energized, defiant. So it's sort of like an underdog album. That's the feeling I have for it. If To the Nameless Dead was about the movement of empires and language and boundaries and sort of 17th and 18th century movement of peoples that ceased to exist, or the Genoese or the Limburgians or the whoever you pick, some European city-state, and how it was eclipsed by the movement of nation states or kind of stuff. This is really about the people on the fringes who resisted the empire, resisted the colony, whether they're from Haiti or Australia or Ireland or whatever, or Finland maybe, or the album kind of revolves loosely around the theme of liberty and our relationship to that, because it is the most important word in English language.
Yeah.
And the pursuit of liberty for all people. So it's a kind of like an underdog, almost like a kind of working class in a way. I even know, in a way, it's kind of like an underdog record. It's about the people, even if they're romantic nationalist heroes in some description, I don't think like Joseph Plunkett in Irish history and stuff. It's telling the story of the people who stood in defiance of authoritarianism, even if they knew their lives were about to be taken. Yeah, yesterday I was only reading about, the Czech resistance and the assassination attempt of Richard Hazel and stuff, of Reinhard Hazel. And so all of these kind of small movements of people, I think people in countries recognize their own heroes, their own mythology, people who passed into myth. And so this is kind of like say I just did a podcast about the Haitian Revolution. 2-song L'Ouverture, this kind of very, very incredible character who defeated with the army and Haiti, the French, the British, and the Spanish. And so that's the kind of things I'm calling on. And then asking the question, where are these people now? Who are these people now that's going to stand up to the movement of authoritarianism and modernism? So I'm reaching back into history to try and ask these questions, but in a sort of modern context. At least that's how I see it.
Well, and I've always admired the way that you were able to kind of like bring history, but bring such like a conceptual, thought-provoking. It's almost like you take history, but you also write maybe like your own sequel to it, or maybe your own sort of like analysis of it. Because when I listen to albums such as A Journey's End or Spirit in the Earth Aflame or The Gathering Wilderness, it seems like it is taking you on these many journeys through places of space and time. This obviously determines the lyrics, as we talked about, but does it also maybe like determine the outcome of the music itself in a way? Could like thinking of these stories help guide how the guitar riffs or the rhythm will sound or anything?
Of course. I mean, Kieran will tell you, even a song like Traditionta, which means tradition in Irish, this is inspired by, old Irish traditional musical. Kieran just took. We take things from different places. Kieran is sort of like what Primordial is supposed to be. It's by nature supposed to have this elemental feel that when you listen to it, it has that windswept earth and sodden Irish feeling to it. But yet, with the band, I never wanted it to be exclusive. It had to be inclusive in the sense that it wasn't. I didn't want the songs to be in Irish only about Irish history. So if I tell, like I put some lines in from the poet Joseph Plunkett. He's kind of sadly forgotten figure now, but he was shot by the English after the Rising in 1916, and he married his Chicago sweetheart the night before he was shot, and knowing that he would be shot. And there's a very famous song about that called Race, which is very famous now. Anyway, the point being, one day I came across just like his birthplace, and just looking at this plaque on the wall, and just basically thinking about him and the idea that these young romantic figures gave their lives for this higher ideal and what must be going through their heads. And then so you try and breathe a bit of living history into the story, and hopefully somebody somewhere goes, I've read about somebody in my area of the region or who somehow did something similar. And so I suppose this one is, in the immortal words of Johnny Cash, this one's for the downtrodden and that kind of thing.
I never heard anybody reference Johnny Cash when discussing, like a heavy black or death metal album, but after his 9 Inch Nails cover, he's accepted.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, it's this one's for the downtrodden, and that's kind of what the feeling of the album that I wanted. This sort of in dark times like we live in now, that somebody might get a shot of actual heavy metal adrenaline from it, old-fashioned, like fucking that rebellious nature of old heavy metal, the real old heavy metal, but also there's all this other stuff that is that sets the backdrop for that, which is this understanding of liberty and our relationship to the world and freedom and that kind of thing.
But
So that
to quote the painter Henri Matisse, every painting is a self-portrait. So like I was just wondering, has there ever been a time through Primordial, or maybe not even Primordial, but even your work with Dread Sovereign or the album you did with Twilight of the Gods or whatnot, is maybe your personal life or your own personal experiences have also played a source of inspiration, or if you prefer to just use music as a sheer escapism and not really bring your personal life into it?
no, I mean, primordial is not escapism, even though if you can escape into it, it's not fantastical. It's not mythological, and that's what sets us apart from a lot of heavy metal. It's not for you to escape from the everyday world. It's going to tell you. It's not. It's. We're basing the band in fact, not fiction. The coffin ships is a fact. The famine was a fact. It's not me. Primordial is not the band for you to try and plug out from the world, even though it's not for me to say maybe. People can take what they want from it. But of course, some of it is semi-autobiographical in a sense, in that there's part of me and my feelings in these songs, my relationship with these things. But I try and make them open out, for people to find themselves within that. So if you play the coffin ships in Ukrainian history has the Holodomor, their own famine. So, and plenty of nations have a similar story. No nation on this earth is self-nameless dead, and tell me what nation on this earth is not born of tragedy. And that's kind of like about all small nations who are occupied or absorbed into the movement of empires and colonies. So this album is kind of about the resistance fighters, so to speak. Not necessarily fighters, but they could be poets, they could be authors, they could be, I don't know, everything from the French Revolution to the women who ran the coffee shops in Paris who were facilitating on the underground resistance. There's all these heroic figures. I suppose that's a word that it's got an element of heroism involved in the record, and which is a traditional heavy metal thing. But it's trying to sort of ask the question: well, where are our heroes now?
Yeah.
In society, as we lurch towards authoritarianism, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's so fascinating you mentioned that too. I was interviewing the band War Kings, and their singer is a college professor in history, and it's amazing on how much history has been open to interpretation in a way where how we analyze historical figures. Like people look at Emperor Nero to be a sort of heroic figure in some way. Some people look at Che Guevara as a hero, even though he slaughtered children. So like it seems like that there's always an interpretation of history within your music. Is it fair to say that maybe when you're using this historical references, even though they're very documentational and stuff, they almost serve as maybe a metaphor? Like I think an album such as Where Greater Men Have Fallen, I think that isn't just representative of history. I think that could represent anybody who's experiencing a moment of despair.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you should always be aware of the counterfactual, I suppose, in the sense that history pivots on some very small moments. The landing in Dunkirk, whether, depending on the weather, or there's so many alternative moments where our history or the moment that we're in right now depended on some small, tiny element that could have, changed the entire movement of history. I mean, what if, like say yesterday I was reading about when the Nazis are approaching Moscow and Stalin retreats to his dacha because he doesn't believe the reports. And when his secret police come to get him, he thinks they're going to arrest him. Because he thinks, right, I'm done, they're going to get rid of him just like I got rid of all of these other people. But instead they get him and go, we can't do this without their leadership, so to speak. And that moment pivots a lot of the Second World War because Stalin then becomes, at least in my understanding, a greater war general, so to speak, which was a bit naive before. And, on such small moments, history pivots. What if he'd gone back to Dhaka and said, right, I'm fucking out, just killed himself? Do the Germans then take, that's where do they go to the Caucasus and control the oil fields? I mean, it's, again, my brain is like constantly mulling over all these kind of things. So I suppose that an element of that is involved in Primordial. But I kind of like to find the personal in these stories, in the hope that somebody, wherever they're listening in, whatever, Peru to Palestine to whatever, can find elements of their own historical sacrifice, martyrdom, hope, but also tragedy. And also, because life is sadness and sorrow, and dealing with these struggles. So, and Primordial is not the band if you're looking for, all metal unicorns and stuff, or, songs about, fictional.
But depending on what you're singing about, whether it is the historical references in Primordial or even any other project that you've been involved with, such as Dread Sovereign or The Nest or Plagued or something like that, does it almost like resonate with you in a different level depending on what you're singing about? Do you almost feel like you channel a different energy if you're doing something with a different subject matter or even different reference?
I mean, Dread Sovereign is kind of my less serious side, even though it's still quite. I'll give you an example. It's like Dread Sovereign and I get to write songs on the guitar, most of them, some of them, and it's more like Motorhead, Tank, Venom meets Spiritual Go Vitus. There's no intention to be original or anything. But if you look in the album For Doom the Bell Tolls, you'll find the death warrant of Sarah Wildes, but Sarah Wildes Averill in 1692, who was hung in Salem. And her surname is Averill, so is mine, Averill. And she actually comes from the same area in England where my name comes from. So track it down, and you're looking at a distant relative being hung in Salem. So I printed in the inside of it's in the album cover, her death warrant. And so if you look at the cover, it's the three characters who are me, Johnny and Rudy, the three guys in the band, who are erecting the gallows for her to be brought to be hung. So even in Dread Sovereign, there's an element of living history, which I bring even to the kind of that sort of heavy metal horror or heavy metal, sort of traditional, sort of black magic esotericism sort of sculpture that is involved in traditional heavy metal, whatever you want to call it, the traditional heavy metal, way of narrative of, that Cyril Gold would have used or Bennett or whatever. But I always try and insert a little bit of history of this.
Yeah. And do you think I also wanted to like dive into the past a little bit because I consider it Primordial to be 30 because I remember I know you formed as you said like in 91, but I think you were under the title of Forsaken at that time. So and I do count the Dark Romanticism, Sorrow's Bitter Harvest, the demo to be it's 30 years old. It's joining me in the 30-year-old camp. But I'm just wondering because there's such an evolution within Primordial sound when you compare Imrama to A Journey's End all the way to now. So like, was this always the vision for Primordial since forming, even as Forsaken back in the day?
No, I don't think we had a vision. I think in the beginning you're 16, you're 17 years old, you're excited about the underground scene. We had lots of friends in bands, whether it was Kurokad, Academy, Carnage, 50 Million, Morphosis. All the guys still doing Sentinel Records and Me and all this kind of other. Our Irish scene was like at 90 to 93, hate trading. I did the 5 issues of the fanzine from like 90 to 96. And you're just involved in the underground and you want to get involved. And there was an ad in a record shop in Dublin for the sound center that said, singer wanted for death metal band. And I'm like, this is my phone number, I'm going to do this. And that was the phone call I made to call the bass player in like August 1991. I know that because, I suppose it just stuck in my head. But it's, which was, I think, a week before my 16th birthday or something like this. Wow. So I was the only person who showed up. And I think it was because I was wearing a Rotting Christ shirt. And I had super long hair. They were just like, all right, you'll do, let's go. And you're on this adventure together. We were trying to make some songs, and it's all, it's very exciting. You're in the room together, and it's still the same core 3 of us, me, Kieran, and Paul, who are doing it. And it's still the same thing. I mean, nothing has really changed in the sense that we still have to meet in a room, rehearse, argue, fight, laugh, joke around, and it's still the same. We're not like, we're still friends. We're not, well, we became friends over the first 6, 7, or 8 year period of the band, and we don't do anything because we have to. We're not a professional band. We do it because that's just, it's just what you do. It's just the nature of creativity, but you just keep rolling. So.
Yep. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. I'm getting 1,000 messages for today. But
oh yeah, of course, your birthday message.
Yeah. But I have one more question for you, and that is because I've always said that art is life, and it can grow and it can develop and even die sometimes. And again, I think some of the lyrics to Primordial's music has aged like fine wine. It's served as like when you put out A Journey's End in 1998. I don't think you could have foreseen the world that we would have lived in 2020. You know what I mean? And I think when you put out like Storm Before Calm, we couldn't have foreseen what would happen in Ukraine in 2022. So do you feel that maybe the music that you write grows with you as you grow as an artist, or do you prefer if every album you make is just a snapshot and just a brief moment of history of who you are at that particular time? You prefer to keep the debut in 1995 and so on and so forth?
I think we could have foreseen the invasion of Ukraine actually, but we've been thinking about it. But that's a different story. I think it's a snapshot of where you are in your life at that moment. I'm proud of all of them. I don't have any regrets. If after this interview I step outside and I'm struck by lightning, then I don't have any regrets with Primordial. We've plowed our own, we've created our own. I don't think anybody really sounds like Primordial. We don't really sound like anybody. We've done our own thing. We've traveled around the world playing percussion ships, breathing some living history into what we see as our sort of artistic inheritance, or historical inheritance, cultural inheritance. And we've just done our own thing quietly in our own corner of the world. And all those albums are snapshots of who we are or were at the time. But Primordial was never prone to making, statements of orthodoxy. Like, we're not hung by our own petard, as I want to say. We didn't create a rod with which to beat ourselves by making our debut album some super extreme satanic black metal record that now at 50 we have to keep playing and nobody wants to hear album 10, they only want to hear album 1. Which, I mean, if that's what your band is, that's no problem either. You still made a great record in 1992, 1991. But we weren't like a statements on the back of records kind of band. So we're not, people don't show up to Primordial Beat going, fucking hell, new songs. Where's the fucking debut? And thankfully we were allowed to grow after that. Maybe it's because we set our ship out from, the port, or whatever you want to say. That's the wrong analogy. We didn't start off with extremity, because extreme music is a young man's game, in a sense, because it's intertwined with our youthful, what do you want to say, the impetuosity of youth, the hormonal cataclysm of it being a young man. And we were not tethered to that. We've been allowed to sort of move maybe through uncharted territories. Anyway, blah blah.
Yeah, well, I love it. I mean, I've always said the best thing about a Primordial album is that every time I listen to something, I learn something, and it makes me want to go down another rabbit hole that inspires me further. So I think that this new album, To the End, continues in that vein. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your time and for this amazing new album. Just before we go, is there anything else with Primordial you'd like to promote in terms of shows or what else we could be expecting in the future, if you're allowed to say it?
Primordial will be playing Maryland Deathfest next year, and we will be playing some American groups around for the first time in about a decade. So there will be club shows in, I think, 7 or 8 different. So that should be good.
Hope New York is one of them. But
I think it is.
Yeah, but thank you so much.
Everybody, we are here with Primordial. Be sure to pick up their new album, How It Ends. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.